All right, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Dieter Schuler. We're going to start this webinar in just a couple of minutes. We're waiting for a few more people to jump on. We're going to talk today about moving from manual to automated identity lifecycle management. And we have with us Neeraj Kumar, who's the Chief Information Officer at Roosevelt University, as well as Damian Clarke, who's the VP of Technology Services at Alabama State University. So give us just a minute to get a couple more people on here, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, we have a few more people jumping on, but we'll go ahead and get started. I'll do some introductions, and that would give everyone else a chance to jump on as well. So as I mentioned before, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. We're going to spend the next hour or so talking about moving from manual to automated identity lifecycle management. We've got two panelists that are going to share their story. First is going to be Neeraj Kumar. Neeraj is the Chief Information Officer at Roosevelt University. Followed by Damian Clarke. Damian is the VP of Technology Services at Alabama State University. My name is Dieter Schuler. I'm the president of QuickLaunch. I'm going to moderate this discussion. We're going to open it up at the end towards questions. Everyone that's, or I should say 4 questions. Everyone that's attending will get a copy of the deck, and we would love your input. So as we go through this, there's a Q&A section in the Zoom area. If you could throw your questions in there, we'll make sure we get them all answered. And we'll open it up to everyone for discussion at the very end. The goal of this is to make sure that we foster a discussion and that you guys can learn from each other about the experiences that some of you have already had in implementing this, and learn best practices for how to get to where you want to be, given that you may not be there already. So with that, let's talk about identity lifecycle management. A lot of people, when they look at this requirement, don't necessarily understand the importance of provisioning accounts or deprovisioning accounts, or provisioning groups or deprovisioning groups in all of the right systems, right? Many people, when they look at this, go, well, wait a minute, I have a single sign-on environment, or I'm implementing a single sign-on environment. That should make it so that my users log in once and they go from application to application without being prompted again. So they will have access to all of these applications and life will be good. That is true to some extent, right? What's important to understand architecturally is that single sign-on will get your users to the application, but most of the applications that we're getting them to are architected in a way to where they now rely on their own user store in order to make decisions about what that user can do inside of that application. Right? So to keep it simple, single sign-on will get your user to the student portal, but the student portal is going to then look inside of its own user store to determine what that user can do inside of the portal. So if you don't appropriately provision the account and update all of the right attributes, entitlements, groups inside of that account, right? You get single sign-on, but your users still can't do all the things that they think they should be able to, or that they should be able to do inside of that system. So let's take a look at the student journey. And this is kind of an oversimplified view of what a typical university looks like. This is probably what you guys are dealing with. They start out as an applicant in a system like Slate. At some point, based on your business rules, they become a student or a well-qualified prospective student. and they end up in something like Ellucian or whatever student information system you may have. From there, and this is kind of what people focus on when they think about lifecycle management and provisioning and deprovisioning, they end up in Active Directory for most of the universities that we work with. And in Active Directory, it's not just about the account, it's also about the groups. And I can't highlight enough the importance of groups, not only from an entitlements perspective, right? Groups in many of these environments determine what a user can access and what they cannot access. But it's also important from a communication perspective. Groups will determine effective communication or ineffective communication. So if you put people in groups that they don't belong in, they get sensitive emails they shouldn't get. If they're not in the right groups, they don't get the appropriate communication, and that can be really bad. Now, from there, right, and this particular diagram shows everything coming from Active Directory after the provisioning from Active Directory to the student information system, but it can come directly from the student information system or other systems. They end up in something like D2L, which is the LMS. They end up in the campus facilities system because they need access to physical buildings. They end up in the student portal. If there's a healthcare function within the university, they end up in the health services portal, library services, financial aid, Zoom, right? The list goes on and on. There's not enough room on this slide to depict all of the potential places where a student potentially has to get provisioned or later on when they stop being a student, deprovisioned, depending on what the rules are. So we've highlighted the student journey. The concept applies, and the systems are probably a little bit different, and the processes are a little bit different, but the concept applies also to employees, so faculty and staff. All right. One of the things that you'll hear, I think, from both of our panelists, and that we hear consistently from our customers that have implemented this system, is this is about not only technology, but people and processes, right? If the processes that you have today are not good and you automate them, all you do is take bad processes and make them work faster, which is not a good thing, right? The other key thing that we've learned is the processes are only as good as the data that you're driving it off of, right? So if the data is not accurate and reliable, or if the processes aren't such that the data is updated appropriately in the right authoritative sources, right, then your lifecycle management processes are only as good as the data that drives it. So with that, let's take a quick look at how this is being done today with a lot of the schools that we've been talking to. So there's two key ways that this gets done today. One is you call Gladys, right? Hey, somebody just became a student. We need an Active Directory account for that student. Gladys, can you please update that and make sure that this person gets an account there? So there's a couple of problems with this, as you can probably imagine. Problem number one, it's error prone, right? You're relying on people to key in data. When people are keying in data in multiple places, there's lots of room for error, or lots of room for a lag, right? Oh, Gladys is out today, she didn't get to it. So this particular student isn't going to get their account until tomorrow. So they're going to be sitting idle for a day because we don't have the right person to do it. All right. The other potential problem is that this person is usually a pretty valuable person. They know a lot about what's going on in the university. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to do this. And now they're spending all their time doing this versus doing other more valuable and more important things. The other approach that we've seen is people have written custom scripts. So they're good at PowerShell. They wrote a script. The person that wrote it is no longer there. Now the script is failing and nobody can debug it, or there's a change required and nobody can make the change because the person that knows how to do it isn't available or isn't there anymore. So the bottom line on kind of this manual process, and by the way, the other key challenge with the manual process is most of the time people remember to create the accounts because there's a phone call that gets made saying, I need this, I need access. But most of the time people don't remember to delete or inactivate the accounts, right? Which may not be that much of a challenge with students, but can certainly become a significant challenge with faculty and staff. Because one of the key things, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, is compliance. So when you're not compliant, you fail audits, the cost of your cyber insurance, security insurance goes up, and you open yourself to exposure in terms of hacks. So removing these accounts is as important as creating them, and that's the part that often gets neglected or forgotten. So the challenge with manual or custom scripting is very high administrative overhead, room for human error, delayed provisioning and deprovisioning, a risk of security breaches and compliance failures, and the inability to update or maintain or debug these scripts once they've been written. So with that, right, let's take a look at what is needed. What is needed is a way to automate the whole joiner, mover, lever process based on the concept of roles and potentially the concept of rules. But the important thing here is to define some birthright provisioning, right? When somebody becomes a student, they automatically get these 5 things. There's never a question. They always get that, right? They may get more because they're a grad student and they may need something else, but they always get these 5 things, right? When somebody goes from point A to point B, and this typically happens in the employer faculty world, right? They get promoted, or they move from being an accountant to being a fundraiser. They should lose all of the privileges they had previously and gain some new privileges. And what ends up typically happening is you move them, you give them the new privileges, and you forget to take away their old ones. And then the fact that they've been at the university for 20 years gives them pretty much access to a lot of things that they shouldn't have access to anymore. And that becomes a potential security hole as well. So let's take a look at the business case and the ROI for automating some of this stuff, right? One of the things that, and again, Damian, Clarke, and Neeraj Kumar will talk a little bit more about this, but one of the things that this will provide is significant time and cost savings. Because if you can automate this, you can take those valuable resources and allocate them to other things. But it's also really important from a user experience perspective, right? One of the worst things you can do from an engagement perspective or from a retention perspective is make it so that students can't get access to the things that they need access to when they need it, right? Now they have to call the help desk. Now they're frustrated. Now they don't do the things that they're supposed to do, right? And it's a downward spiral from there, right? In addition, you can reduce your risk, you can improve your compliance, and you can streamline the entire process and boost productivity across the university. So one of the things we'd like to understand from you guys, our attendees, is how are you doing this stuff today? All right, and we've made it kind of simple. We've given you 3 choices. Today, you're doing manual processes. You've got some homegrown scripts that address most of this, or you have a solution provider that is providing you with an automated lifecycle management system. If you could take a minute and just answer this question, and we'll show everybody kind of the results, right? I'd love to summarize this, and then we'll turn it over to the panelists. Adam, are you playing music for this, or are we just doing this without music?
I'm not playing any music. I mean, next
All
time
right.
I'll be ready.
All right, let's give everyone another 30 seconds to answer. All right, Adam, if you could show us the results. So this is pretty consistent with a lot of the conversations that we've had. 11% of you are doing this through some sort of manual process. 68%, which is actually higher than I expected, are doing this through homegrown scripts that you've written. And about 21% of you already have a solution provider that is automating this for you. So with that, what I'd like to do next is turn it over to Neeraj Kumar. Neeraj is the Chief Information Officer at Roosevelt University. We can't see it now, but his office window shows us beautiful Lake Michigan and Michigan Avenue in Chicago. Got an awesome facility there at Roosevelt. And he's going to share with us his journey on automating the identity lifecycle management process.
Thank you, Dieter. And yes, when I'm not working from home, I can see that beautiful Lakeshore Drive and the lake and even the Soldier Field, for those of you familiar with Chicago. All right, so can you go to the next slide, please? So a little bit about Roosevelt. We are located, our primary location is in Chicago, but we also have a campus in Schaumburg, Illinois, which is a suburban campus about 35 miles west of Chicago. The current student population is about 4,200 students, although I think when we first signed on, first started thinking about automating the identity and access management protocols, we were at about 5,000 students. We've actually, over the last 5 years or so, gradually gone down, but in the last 2 semesters, we've gone back up to 4,200. So at one point, we were at about 3,900 students. In terms of employees, we have about 800, which does include the adjunct faculty population. And the key things about the tech stack is that Slate is our prospective student portal. The data then moves on from Slate to Banner, which is our student information system and our HR information system, or HRIS. Blackboard is the learning management system, and EAB is our student retention platform that we use here. So a little bit about our journey. This actually began about, I would say, 12 years ago, when we were doing everything, a combination of manually for employees and through homegrown scripts for students. Our challenge at the time was that we had a very impatient population. Our student expectations were that once they were notified from admission that they are now a student, that they would have instant access to our email. And we were often running the scripts on a nightly basis, and that which would delay them getting access for about 24 hours. And in some cases, we would be cautious and tell them that check in 2 days, because every once in a rare while, the script something would happen and it wouldn't run perfectly, which would cause delay. And instead of explaining to students about the errors in the script, we would just say, look, you'll have access in 48 hours. But the desire from both our student body and from our colleagues in all of the student service offices was that this experience has to be improved. And the expectations were that when they received the email, the instructions were about their admission to the university, the instructions on how to access email were included in that, so they would get their account instantly. And then in addition to that, we were having some staffing reductions or turnover that was happening at the time, which made this even more difficult. So we understood at that point that we've got to figure out a solution to make it run seamlessly, so we don't have to look through these scripts on a regular basis and have to deal with exceptions that different offices came up with. So once we had that recognition that we have to move from homegrown scripts to a more automated way, one of the things we realized was that we just cannot have, those regular exceptions that one office or the other was causing. So this required us to sit down with user community and to understand and to set the rules very, very clearly, that what would be that trigger that would create this account, and how would the student go about claiming the account and get access to things. And we did not want to back then we were dealing with 5,000 students, so we did not have to overwhelm our help desk with calls about, why didn't I get this access? Why didn't I get that access? So we wanted to make sure all of those things were taken care of during the automation journey that we had. Back then, we implemented a solution from Microsoft, the Microsoft FIM solution, Federated Identity Manager, as we called it, or as it was called. And so it took us about 1.5 years to get there in terms of fully automating all those aspects. But we were live with Microsoft FIM and used it for 7 years. And over the years, while there were lots of improvements, what we quickly learned was the tool was not very flexible. And being higher ed, somehow you have to have that flexibility because things change. The population that we were giving email addresses changed along the way. There were decisions made with admission and registrars and financial aid offices that the point at which we were giving email addresses had to be different from what was agreed on. And making those kinds of changes were difficult. They were doable, but very difficult. We didn't have the in-house expertise because due to turnover, that expertise had moved on. And so that became very expensive to maintain and administer the system. We had to outsource that. And so there would be a monthly fee through a third-party provider to maintain that for us. And so it was becoming clear to us that we needed something simpler, yet powerful enough to handle all of our needs. So that's when we started reviewing some alternatives and we selected QuickLaunch. And I think the key things as I was reviewing, why did we actually select QuickLaunch? What I realized was that affordability was one key thing, right? Being a small to mid-size higher ed nonprofit, it was critical to have something that was affordable, that was within our budget. The other key thing was we needed support. We knew we had a small IT staff, and while we wanted to have ownership of the tool, but what we also knew was turnover is a reality in small IT teams, and so we wanted to have some work with someone who could assist us along the way. And that's what we found with QuickLaunch. And obviously the tool being flexible because things change, and we wanted to make sure that we were working with somebody with the tool where there was enough flexibility in the tool, and also that we could partner with someone who would listen to us and put things that we needed on the product roadmap. So continuing with this, over the last 5 years where we are, that we have automated a number of things with QuickLaunch. We have all of our applications that are used at Roosevelt, or I should say almost all of the applications that we have are on single sign-on. All of the provisioning does happen automatically through QuickLaunch. In terms of deprovisioning, all of the rules-based deprovisioning currently also happens through QuickLaunch, so we don't have to worry about people leaving and us forgetting to turn off things. So that all of that also happens through QuickLaunch. We still have one small project that we intend to go back, the really, really old accounts that we want to do a scan of something that may have been deleted in the past that may not be, may still be provisioned. But the good thing is that all of the provisioning and deprovisioning is now actively happening automatically. We've also included some of the applications in terms of authorization. So who gets access to that application is also part of this. And that's something that is in our roadmap as well, that we want to go back now to all of the different applications and start thinking through what else could be automated. So we can eliminate some of those steps that currently happen through scripts. All of this actually is currently being driven by business needs. And so I just wanted to highlight the partnership that we have with HR for employees and for admission and the registrar's office for students. What we did not want to do is create a set of infrastructure where a Active Directory or banner define these things. We wanted to make sure that HR understood that they are the ones who determine who gets access to things in terms of employees. So based on how they've created employee codes, that's what determines who gets access to what. So that was an exercise that was critical to the success of this initiative. We're being on the same page with HR, making sure they understood that if they were to change anything in terms of employee codes, that they partner with us proactively so that we can build that into our framework and not have to deal with it once we found out issues from employees. Similarly, it was also critical to work with admission and the registrar's offices to ensure that it's clear at what point do students get access to this to accounts, and that same thing was being communicated to the students. So we didn't have to deal with those issues at our help desk. Obviously, like any tool, like any process, we do run into an issue or two, which we then have to conduct a root cause analysis. So the help desk at Roosevelt and the sysadmins have the capability to do the basic troubleshooting. And then if they're unable to understand or resolve it quickly, we have channels to escalate the issues to QuickLaunch. Overall, when I look at it, I look at all of our different audiences, and I do feel that students in general are very satisfied with this, right? They get the accounts instantly, they have access to it right away. In the notification that goes from admission includes the instructions. So it eliminates all of those calls that would otherwise reach the help desk. The same about employees. The notification goes to their personal email address so that they are aware of the steps they need to take. Their supervisor is copied on that. So there is that satisfaction with new employees that they're getting access to these things in a very timely basis and with detailed instructions. The IT staff is happier because think about, I can't even imagine having to deal with, all the constant onboarding of whether it's adjuncts or staff or faculty, and then similarly with students. So overall, I feel it's been a great exercise and obviously a lot of upfront work to make sure that all of these things are mapped correctly. But in general, I'm very satisfied with the solution. In terms of our next steps and things that we've thought about, the first one is more to do with single sign-on and multi-factor authentication. We require multi-factor authentication, which is also part of the QuickLaunch solution. So we require MFA for all access. And there was a time when we would require it at every single sign-on. But we've eased those things, and now we require it every 15 days that they have to use MFA as long as they're using the same device. If it's a different device, then of course they have to use MFA for that. So that's one thing that we've been looking at to do, and we're confident it can be done. It's getting our community on board and make sure they understand why the need for that. We're also, like I mentioned before, we're also thinking about the application level authorization. We currently do it for a couple of systems, but we want to keep expanding it to include all the systems, or if not all, many systems, so that at the application level, what people have access to is also addressed, not just the authentication layer. And some of the other things that we've also thought about, obviously having MFA built into this, it does give us some recognition in terms of security, that, who all are trying to get access and how often. And so we have some data about that. We want to have more work done in that space so there are clearer patterns for us to understand that. And then eventually we want to make sure that, because all of this data and logs do exist, right? How do we learn any connection, correlation between logins to different systems and access to different systems, and if there's any connection to student retention and student success. So those are some of those things that we've discussed, and we're at very in the early stages of that discussion, but we're hopeful that with all of these logs and data on who's accessing and from where and how often, we'll be able to draw some connections between that information and student success. And I'll leave it at that. Back to you, dear.
Neeraj, this was very valuable. Thank you. There's a lot to unpack here. So a couple questions from my side, and then we'll open it up to others as well. I'd love to talk a little bit more about the pattern recognition aspect of it. We get a lot of requests from our customers for reporting on behavior, right? And there's two aspects to it. There's the risk aspect, and then there's the retention, or just kind of looking at, who's doing what, and does that make sense, and are they utilizing things that we want, right? So one of the things we get, for example, is show me all the students that haven't logged into the LMS in the last 3 days, right? Because that's an opportunity to engage and make sure that there's no problem, right? I'd love to understand kind of what the key metrics are from your perspective in terms of recognition.
Sure. So that's exactly how we're approaching it, right? First, getting a baseline understanding of, like the example you gave, right, of students who have not yet logged into the learning management system, students who have not set up appointments with advisors. So those things also go through. So that goes through our retention system, EAB, which is also a part of this. So by getting a sense of what tools have students used or not used, and then also tracking their journey through a semester to see. So we have this data on students not using it or having used it. But then on the other end of it, at the end of the semester, is there, we have the data on grades, we have the data on student retention. So do they come back in the next semester? Do they graduate? So trying to then draw parallels so just because a student had 3 advising appointments, right? Is that any different from a student who may not have any advising appointment but still graduated? So trying to unpack all of that to see, based on these logs, is there any correlation or connection with the end results, right? Because ultimately, all of these processes are great, but as a goal for the institution, we're interested in ensuring that students graduate from the university and then, are successful in whatever careers they choose. So trying to draw those connections where possible.
There's a tremendous opportunity there to look at all of the log data that we have, both from a behavior perspective as well as who exists in what accounts perspective, or who's part of what groups, right? And start to show you that in a way that is meaningful and that allows you to derive patterns and make business decisions and changes on that. You mentioned retention, right? The other opportunity that we see consistently is risk, right? Here's an ID that's been attempted 5 times in the last 2 minutes, and it's coming from different IP addresses. Or here's an account that got locked out, right? Those kinds of things as well.
Right. So at a very basic level, we already explored that as part of multi-factor authentication rules, but I think it's gradually learning that what the possibilities are and how we could effectively leverage that. I think that's our goal.
By the way, the other report that we get quite a bit from our customers that they look at is we are at the beginning of the semester, we've sent an email to our students telling them that they have to activate their account. We sent out 1,000 of those, 600 people did it, 100 people tried but failed because they ran into problems, and the rest haven't done it yet. We need to remind them, right? That kind of stuff I think will be valuable as well.
Absolutely.
I'd love to, you mentioned reducing the help desk calls, which is a key ROI component to a lot of this stuff, not only from a single sign-on perspective, but also from a lifecycle management perspective. Have you done any analysis on how much you've been able to reduce your help desk activity from these 2 components?
Not something that I can truly quantify for you at this time. But the effect is real, and here's why I say that. We used to have a fairly robust help desk, and now I have a 1 person, and there are 0 phone calls. In other words, we don't take phone calls at our help desk. So the students and our community, we felt that we were at a point where we did not need to offer a phone-based help desk. So it's really ticket-based. Students can submit tickets, faculty and staff can submit tickets, and that was strictly due to the significant drop in the call volume when we did have the help desk that way. But what we haven't been able to do, or I guess we haven't really invested that much energy in, is to see if if we can have causation, right? That this caused it, because we did a number of changes in our infrastructure. And so all of them together helped reduce that volume significantly, but I just don't know which one contributed how much.
All right, the big thing I want to focus on, you mentioned eliminating exceptions. One of the biggest objections that I hear when people start thinking about automating lifecycle management is, man, I would love to do this, but we have so many exceptions, it's impossible for us to define the rules. This is just kind of, almost tribal knowledge, so we're just going to keep doing it with people. It sounds like you went through a process where you started to understand why all these exceptions existed, and you were able to kind of streamline that and eliminate a lot of that stuff. If you could talk about that for a minute, I'd love it.
So it's honestly as simple as you described it, right? So listening to our colleagues, and for us at least, most of the exceptions were on the employee side, HR side, and there were very, very few on the student side. So it was a very honest discussion. And I started at the top with my peers, vice presidents, to make sure they understood why we want to reduce or eliminate the exceptions. And it wasn't for the sake of eliminating exceptions, it's that we just cannot handle, we just don't have the bandwidth to be able to handle exceptions. And starting at the top, getting their buy-in first and having them have that conversation with their teams and sending that message was critical. Right? Without that, there was no way that I could have relied on our sysadmins to have conversations with their peers and see if they could influence change that way. So that was the first step. But then we requested a list of all of the exceptions. We already knew most of them, but we wanted to make sure that we invited our colleagues in HR to spell out all of the exceptions and why they're needed. And then we started working with them in terms of how a separate code could be created in the system, an employee code, which would then take care of that exception versus having us manage that exception behind the scenes. So gradually working with them, the Banner team, our enterprise apps team was crucial in that discussion as well, because they understood all of these nuances in Banner and how it's possible to create these kinds of things as a rule versus having a one-off exception. So all of that was critical in making that happen.
Yeah, I think that's really important. That's the people and process aspect of this from a success perspective. Final question. This was from one of the attendees, and then we'll turn it over to Damian Clarke. How long after adoption did you feel confident utilizing QuickLaunch?
I think we wouldn't have moved to production if we weren't confident. So we were pretty confident fairly early. In the testing phase, we had a discussion with our team members, and once everybody was confident that we're good, that's when we moved to production.
So you did a pretty thorough job in your test and dev environment of making sure that everything was working before you went live.
Right. Yes, confidently can say that. I don't recall major issues, and maybe a part of it was because we were automated with FIM for many years, so we kind of knew that just cannot afford to have those kinds of blips in the process as we go live. So that might have helped us, but I don't remember issues as we were going live or team members not feeling confident that it'll work.
Very helpful, Neeraj. Thank you very much for sharing that.
Sure.
Let me turn it over to Damian Clarke. Damian is the VP of Technology Services at Alabama State University, and he's going to share his journey, and then we'll open it up for questions again.
All right. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. A good day. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
All right. So as Dita said, I'm the Vice President of Technology at Alabama State University. So Alabama State University is located in the capital city of Alabama, Montgomery, Alabama. It's a similar size institution to Roosevelt. It's a historically Black institution and it's HBCU. We also have approximately 4,000 students, 43 undergraduate programs, and 34 graduate programs. Some of our top programs include biology, criminal justice, rehabilitation services, physical therapy, clinical mental health, and so on. So our journey to automation was very, very similar to what Neeraj described at Roosevelt University. But I want to discuss it from a different point of view. So there was, similar to Roosevelt, there was a lot of user expectation on getting things done quickly, internal expectations in the IT department of not having to deal with so many tickets on one specific issue because provisioning folks and onboarding folks, whether it's students, faculty, or staff, so cumbersome and manual. So we first looked at this, and just to set the stage, we are not as far along as Roosevelt University. So we are now beginning the journey where QuickLaunch is concerned. But we started the journey a couple of years ago. So we looked at this from a security first perspective, and specifically from the Zero Trust framework. So this framework requires strict identity verification for every person and device trying to access resources on our network. So we moved away from the traditional, if I may use the term, pre-COVID type of view with security, where security is on the perimeter of the institution, a virtual perimeter that sits in a firewall, and you're monitoring ingress and egress data. So a perimeter that is around each and every individual and each and every device. So we wanted to make sure that wherever that individual is, and wherever that device is, once it's trying to access any of our resources, it could be properly authenticated in order to access those resources. And some of those zero trust principles include multi-factor authentication. Dieter brought up a good point about SSO, right? SSO is really nice and convenient. Single sign-on solution is a nice and convenient solution where you have one password to get into multiple applications, but you also have to present what is called lateral movement within the network and lateral movement within an application. So you want to make sure your roles access is properly done. And I like the term that Dieter used, you call Gladys. Our Gladys is a Carmen and a Jackie. We have two Gladyses that people will call and say, well, do this and set me up in the system. And they just figure it's a push of a button. So we wanted to automate all of these processes from this perspective, the zero trust security perspective. The second reason why we wanted to automate was, as we all know, for any CIO, security is number one. But in the
Looks like Damian froze. Are you guys seeing that as well?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, let's give him a second to see if we can get him back.
is our the name of our mascot. Apparently I froze. Am I okay?
You froze for about a minute, Damian.
Okay. On which slide? This slide or the previous slide? Okay.
This slide, I believe.
Okay, so I'll start over. So the second reason why we decided to move away from a manual to an automated process was we wanted to be abreast of the Gen AI type technology. So we implemented our own ChatGPT-like application. We call it Ask Stinger. So Stinger is the name of our mascot, and our mascot, as you can see on the screen, it's a hornet. So in order to do AI or Gen AI properly, you got to make sure that all of your data sources are accessible in a secure manner. So we created a lakehouse, and we plugged in various business intelligence, reporting, and analytics tools. And on top of that, a Gen AI application as well. So the problem here was, as we all know, human expertise and organizational intellectual property is expensive to attain, as it's expensive to keep. So we wanted to not only create a ChatGPT-like application for the classroom for students and faculty by creating a tool that could serve as a virtual professor or do professional development for faculty, students, and staff, and to help with research. But more importantly, we wanted to create digital twins or operational agents on the functional side of the university operations. And what I mean by that is we wanted to create a tool that could help an admissions counselor or a financial aid counselor. When I say help, I'm not just talking about a student engaging with that tool to get a question answered, but literally helping an admissions counselor, financial aid, students accounts employee to perform their functions. And what we found that, a lot of these functions were very manual, and it would take away their time from actually serving students and other stakeholders. So they would spend a lot of time doing manual processes. So we created this application to help with those manual processes. So in order to make sure, now that we have our data in more of a cohesive and accessible manner or place and format, we had to make sure that it can be accessed very, very easily and securely by whomever has access to it. So our tech stack, our ERP is PeopleSoft, our CRM is Slate, like Roosevelt. And our collaboration tool, we recently moved from G Suite to M365. And we made that move once again from a security first perspective. So not only do we have the email features and the Office 365 features, we have the full security suite. So we are trying to do automation at all levels of our IT ecosystem. And all along, we actually had QuickLaunch, but unfortunately, our ecosystem wasn't in a right place or state to start implementing the features that Roosevelt University talked about. So we are now in the process of implementing the identity and access management and identity governance and administration. So we want to, not get rid of our Gladys's, but we want to make sure that, our folks can do more high level, high value work that can be more impactful to an end user or stakeholder while automating manual processes in the background. So while we had some scripts, there was too many ad hoc requests, too many ad hoc processes, too many ad hoc text all during the day to do this, to do that. So we are now working vigorously with QuickLaunch and now automate our system. So QuickLaunch is at the top of our tech stack. We have cleaned up from the bottom up, and now we are focusing with QuickLaunch to automate our digital identity, make sure we have the right people accessing the right data and also the right roles. So we know that an employee could be an employee role, an employee could be an employee and student role. So we want to make sure that when these things happen, whenever it happens, there's the right processes that QuickLaunch can mimic and implement and automate these roles and access as quickly and seamlessly as possible. And another very important role that many of us might forget is a vendor role. A vendor may want access into the system to do various things, and we want to make sure that that access is temporary. We want to make sure that that access is restricted and secure only to the things that they are going to touch. So that's where we are at Alabama State University. Happy to take any questions.
Lots of questions, Damian. One of the things that you touched on that I want to just go into a little bit more deeply is the role issue, right? You mentioned The typical challenge that we see is, hey, I've got somebody who's an employee and a student. Right? And there's lots of implications of that. Were they an employee first and then they became a student? Were they a student first and then they became an employee? That makes a difference. Right? If I want to eliminate the fact that they're now only an employee but no longer a student, how do I do that without taking away their student stuff? Some of the schools that I've talked to have decided that they're going to have 2 different IDs, which I'm not crazy about. I'd love to get your thoughts on some of that.
So unfortunately, we started that way. And, I've been at Alabama State for a little over 3 years. So when I walked into that situation, it was, and Neeraj, I think he said it nicely, right? And it's a very important point he brought up, right? You got to have buy-in when you make changes, when you do stuff. In your mind, it may seem, something that could be understood by everyone, but it's not necessarily understood. And sometimes that buy-in, in fact, most times that buy-in starts within the IT department. You got to change the culture of the IT department. Even the IT department could get accustomed doing certain things a particular way for whatever reason. So when I walked into this institution, we had 2 digital IDs, and I was like, why are you giving an employee another email address because they're a student? And, host of explanations. And we had our discussions, and we came with, a gentle nudge to the agreement that we don't need 2 separate IDs, right? We need separate roles for each individual using 1 ID. And that's where we are at today. So it took us a while to make sure that our ecosystem, IT ecosystem, was in the right place to do the QuickLaunch implementation. Because, like I said, we actually had QuickLaunch for quite a few years, long before I got here. And luckily, I knew of the product, I knew of its capability. But we couldn't move to implement those features as quickly as I wanted to. We had to rearrange and change things around in the ecosystem before we got to that point.
Yeah, there's always people, process, and technology. The technology is not easy, but easier than a lot of the people and process stuff that you have to get under control first, right?
Most definitely, yes.
So deciding on 1 account versus 2 accounts, right, is a big business decision that has lots of implications and ramifications.
Yes.
The other thing that you mentioned that I want to probe a little bit on is the vendor and temporary account requirement. That comes up quite a bit. I'd love to have you talk a little bit about how you are handling that or planning to handle that.
Yeah, so we want to implement what is called privileged access management, where even within the institution, we want to create privilege and also temporary accounts. And luckily, we never had an issue with a vendor in terms of access and security. But since we rely, just like Neeraj, we have a very small IT team, and we rely on vendors to serve as an extension to our department. Sometimes we have to give extended access, and we have to make sure that whether it's short or extended access, it has to be restricted access. We have to make sure that for our overall security requirements, for our internal expectations, we have to make sure that vendor access is temporary and restricted. So that's something we plan to implement the privileged access or PAM feature.
All right, we got a bunch of questions coming in from attendees. I'm sorry, you were going to add something?
Peter, let me just add to what Damian just said about vendor access. So the way we approached it and the way it's working for us, so as a possible alternative for people who are listening, is that, again, we worked with HR and we created an employee class that is for non-compensated employees. We call it non-compensated. I don't think we call it employees, but something to reflect that these are vendors or third parties, partners, and then so that way, again, Banner, because it's created in Banner HRIS, so that continues to be the authoritative source of data. And then to address the need to ensure that they are discontinued or disabled at the right time, we have some default dates in there. We ask the office, right, what's the thing, but they generally give us a fairly long time. So we have triggers built in that it would automatically disable the account in X number of months. But 1 month before the account disablement, it'll email the account, email it to the respective office so they can tell us if that account needs to be continued for another X number of months. So those are the rules that we agreed on with the community and said that's how we're doing it, only because we wanted to make sure that we in IT don't have to maintain that set of information, that it's still maintained in Banner HR. So that way the authoritative source remains the same. So sorry to jump in.
No, that's very valuable. And in fact, one of the things that's implicit in what you guys just mentioned is the requirement for some sort of a hierarchy on who works for who or who owns that contractor, right? Because that email has to go to somebody that is responsible for the contractor. It's probably not going to be HR because HR doesn't even know, is that contractor still working there or not? So there's a lot of things like that that we see that get opened up, again, that require understanding of the business process and what the business rules are, and then it's actually pretty easy to implement. I'm going to go through I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I'm going to go through, we got a whole bunch of questions in. I don't know if we're going to be able to get to all of them, but I want to get to at least some of them. Question from Isaac for both of you guys. For staff members who teach a course once a year, how do you manage their faculty access?
So for us, our source of truth is our ERP, which is PeopleSoft. So regardless if it's faculty, and there's some other related questions to that. So I'm just going to try to knock those off as well. So in our source of truth, we determine when somebody's active or not active, right? And then we feed that Active Directory. At the moment, we move into Azure shortly to determine what type of account, to determine the email address. Some people are asking about the double identity. Your email provider, in our case, M365, you could have multiple inboxes. So you could have an employee inbox.
You just got to the next question.
Yeah, so I just want to knock that off.
This is awesome. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, because that was an issue for us as well. I mean, these are questions we were asking ourselves internally, right? So M365, and I'm pretty sure Gmail does it as well. You can have multiple inboxes. So if I'm an employee, I have an employee inbox. If I decide to become a student, I have an employee and a student inbox. So you're seeing two different sets of emails. And everything is driven from your source of truth. In our case, is our ERP. So we constantly read and monitor our source of truth to determine the access to our applications.
I think the multiple inboxes thing is a way to address one of the biggest concerns people have, right? Because if you're getting all of your sensitive employee emails in the same inbox as your student emails and you stop being an employee, but you continue to be a student, right? That's a huge potential security breach. Mm-hmm. And I think multiple inboxes is the way to address that for most of the schools that I've dealt with. So this is great.
And that's how we do it as well. We have multiple inboxes, and also for the temporary employees, the adjunct faculty, I think that was the question. So again, the business logic defines it. So if they are in our system Banner as an adjunct faculty, they automatically get access to different systems. And let's say they're not active in a given semester. So again, the business rules are that they will continue to retain email access for 3 years. So email is managed a certain way, and then, but some other systems are dropped. And so through authorization management, for example, there are separate rules that say, yeah, they will no longer have the Zoom workplace access, but they'll just continue to have a general Zoom access. So that logic is built into our scripts, so it updates the accounts appropriately.
Yeah, that's helpful. This is for Damian. Are you all Microsoft or QuickLaunch for your IDP? And does your authentication go to Microsoft or QuickLaunch for MFA?
Currently we are all QuickLaunch, and that's a question that we haven't answered. Meaning that even though we are currently QuickLaunch, we just moved to M365. We are still answering the question of, do we stay only QuickLaunch? Do we have some kind of hybrid between QuickLaunch and M365? So That's a good question. That's something, if you're in a similar situation, given your environment, you'll have to determine how to move forward. But that's a question that we are asking ourselves right now. So QuickLaunch does everything for us right now, but there are some redundancies within M365, and we are trying to determine how we deal with that.
Guys, I really appreciate you taking the time to participate in this discussion. I think there's a lot here that the attendees have learned and that is valuable. There's a bunch of questions that we didn't get time to answer, but for those of you that didn't get your questions answered, we will get those answered for you after the webinar. I want to be respectful of time. Damian and Neeraj, I assume you're open to taking some calls from people if they have additional questions for you, or at least taking an email.
Sure.
And that would be greatly appreciated. Again, thank you very much for your time and for participating in this.
Great. Thank you. Glad we could help.